Our first keynote speaker is actually Morten Elvang. Thanks for your flexibility, and we're delighted to have you start us out at this event.
Thank you. I'm really pleased I can. So I'm going to talk to you about something I've had a lot of fun doing. And I'm still having fun with it, so maybe it's a little bit rough in the edges. It also means that I really appreciate any kind of feedback you have on it. And I'll try to tell it as a story so that you can follow, and I hope you will enjoy. So the topic is about navigating complexity with lean portfolio management. A lot of people ask me, why do you call it lean? And that's actually quite simple. Lean is there to remind us that we don't want to waste opportunity. So we want to minimize the amount of wasted opportunity. Otherwise, it's pretty much about portfolio management. So classically, portfolio management is actually strategy execution. But also we talk about aligning strategy with execution. That's what the portfolio management function do, at least in my part of the world, organizational, project, program, portfolio management. And it used to work super well. We would make a strategy, we would divide and conquer, we would follow up now and then, we would align. And if we did it ever so often, it was good enough to do the trick. But something is changing. It doesn't really work like it used to. We need to coordinate more and more often. Very often, one side of the organization doesn't really know what the other side is doing. So rather than aligning, I claim that we need to be aligned all the time. We cannot allow ourselves to not be aligned. And that actually changes everything. So if you think this through from the strategy driving the execution, now everything moves to the middle, and that middle, cohesive middle, informs the strategy. People talk about emergent strategy. It informs the budget. I mean, people are struggling with the budget, right? The money always gets in the way, but actually it's your thing, the thing in the middle, the portfolio that informs the budget. It informs the organization, it informs the plan. So it's a complete inside-out reversal. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Then you can also say, is this real? Yeah, absolutely. So part of this story is that I've been working in this business for many years, as you can see. And what I have found is that some of the things that actually worked quite well in the past, of course they still work, but they now get a new and more important role because of this change. So some of the elements we have known, like big room plannings, QBR, whatever you call it, actually becomes the center of the portfolio management in the future. It requires a much broader network of people. So rather than becoming this static thing, and of course, I know it's not really, but still there was a bit of phased approach, like the strategy, the roadmap, etc. Now it becomes a bit more a dance. There's a thing called intent-based leadership. You can talk about intent, contribution, the intent of the strategy, the contribution from the execution, that they somehow inform each other. It becomes a movement rather than a progression. That's the context. Complexity sometimes freaks people out a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that at least you get my view on what it is, and also inviting you. So what do you think? Is the world getting more or less complex? More, right? Do any of you have a good example of where that complexity is showing its ugly head? And I'll repeat what you answer, so don't worry about the microphone. How do you see the head of complexity?
The overwhelming use of now artificial intelligence tools for activities that were not otherwise done through AI, and the inability of us to sometimes know which is which or what we will be doing in the future.
Yeah, so these days you know for sure that there's always a more clever guy in the room called ChatGPT, right? And no matter how well you prepare, it can always somehow do it better. That's really annoying. Also, my definition of a customer is someone who knows what they want when they see what they are getting. That's complexity right there. I think you have all tried it. If nothing else at home, when you cook the most wonderful dinner, and then it turns out that the family wants something else. I mean, there you go. So you actually see it in quite many places. About 10 years ago, there was a framework developed called Kinefin. It's spelled Synefin, but don't say that. Call it Kinefin otherwise. It's a Welsh word. If you have never seen it before, I would actually say that's the one thing you got to do. Maybe you have a longer list when you get home, but please put this one on it. Just Google it. try to figure out or find the story about the birthday party told by Dave Snowden, and you'll be hooked forever. So anyway, what this framework says, it's a sense-making framework. So these are not states, these are aspects of any given situation. You can be more or less clear, more or less complicated, more or less complex, more or less chaotic. And one is connected very strongly to the other. A famous Danish guy from construction, Svend Bertelsen, he always said that if you take the simplest thing and add people, you have chaos. So you can instantly move from having focus on one to the other. So just to give you an idea, the clear, that's like the Lego IKEA kit. Of course it can go wrong, but actually most people can do it. That's the whole idea. Then complicated, that's a bit like a kitchen, or you can say it's a complicated task at work where more than one expert needs to help. So the kitchen, normally it goes right, but maybe the carpenter and the plumber doesn't really agree, and it ends up being weird. But still you can recover, you still have predictability fundamentally. That totally changes when you go to complexity. So in the complex domain, planning doesn't work. I mean, you cannot count up your plan. It's not completely bad. You have something that's called dispositionality. So history matters. You can count on things. They normally go like they normally go, but don't be too sure about it. And for sure, don't plan longer than what you can see. Chaos is not a permanent thing. It's something that happens. It's like an accident or a sudden surprise, whatever. So, and that's the place where you're at the mercy of whatever you believe in, and you want to recover as fast as possible and get back to normal. Then there's a super important state called confused. And that's normally bad, but actually here it's good. It means that you're not sure what's going on. So unless you are in chaos and about to die, then actually pause a moment, take a cold glass of water and think about it and try to figure out what's going on. That's the framework. So potential signs of complexity in an organization, I put a long list here, but the ones I like to look at is that if everybody is just freaked out, frustrated, stressed, that's very often a sign that complexity is at play. Or, sorry, maybe this is bad to read. So people are frustrated, value lost. So you also have huge losses of value because things are changing and you don't get it. So you more and more often find that things are changing without you catching it. It's a sign that complexity is at play. COVID is an amazing example. I mean, very, very few people saw that coming, and some of those got very rich. The rest of us was just wondering what on earth is going on, and forgot about selling the shares in time. At least I did. So now I can explain to you what this presentation is about. Because, this presentation. So what I'm assuming is that you are interested in portfolio management. I guess you are, because that really is strategy execution, at least in my head. I think you're a little bit curious about complexity, at least I hope so. And then what I hope with this presentation is to give you some ideas for something you can do different. So maybe you don't get all the recipes here, but it's actually online. I have had a bit of fun writing it down. And if something is missing, you can always give me a call. So there's nothing behind the scenes, and it's not super complex. So just looking at some of the typical portfolio challenges, I guess you actually know these really, really well. So this is a walk down memory lane. So I'll go to this one which I tagged up a little bit. So there's a few things that fascinates me, is that there's actually a huge sustainability agenda in this. It's well known that people get ill from work. I mean, stress leads to physical illness, and physical illness leads to, well, you know it. So if we are managing people the wrong way, if we are offering the wrong models to manage, it actually literally makes people ill. I think that's bad. I think we need to do something about that. So I'm working with the Danish Engineering Association on that topic from a stakeholder point of view. Then there's the economic loss. I don't know how it is in your country. In Denmark, we have a long row of public examples. They're just burning so much money and nothing is coming out. And of course, it's complex. That's actually the point. But part of the point is that they probably use the wrong models for managing those types of projects. And I think that's super sad when we know better. We didn't allow ourselves to be confused long enough to figure out that we had to do something different. So I hope we can create a world that becomes better and better at seeing when the way we try to manage things is not making it. So for me, that's sustainability, reducing economic loss and increasing the well-being of people. Then there's the two classical ones I would normally ask, but you know it. So the classical one is that the leaders have no idea what's going on. You can say leadership is flying blind. And of course, they're not blind. It just means that they don't really sort of feel that they know what's going on. So that's number one. And number two is that there's way too many things going on. I mean, there are too many projects in flight. Those are the two classical symptoms I see. Does that resonate? And then there's some fun numbers. I love collecting these numbers, also added some of my own. So one is about the black swan moments. It's hiding here. And if you're in a large organization that's of a certain age, you will know this, because all of them have some disaster in the past that burned a lot of money. There's a Swedish guy called Hans Rosling. He wrote a book called Factfulness. It's not as important as Cynefin, but it's a super good book. So he actually makes the point of view that if you can prevent just one thing like COVID in the world, all the money you ever burned on first-class tickets to the World Health Organization is worth it and more. And that's the same logic with this. So this is like a super important area in your company. Most of you will not be doing it as well as you could. And if you can crank it up just a little bit to the level where you catch and avoid the next disaster, it's gonna bring home all the money you ever spent on that. I think that's kind of a nice way to thinking. I don't know if it makes sense, but at least in the companies I have been in, I know those programs. It's like billions of euros we talk about. So, portfolio management, what is that? I'll also do this a bit quick because I guess you know it. So portfolio management, aligning strategy to execution, maximizing value, minimizing risk. And then for me, the portfolio is all the money, all the activities. So it's basically everything, also the coffee machines. Of course, you don't want to discuss about them in your strategic planning meetings, but that's money too. And then you filter from there. So all about the money. Interestingly, in my world, money is people. Coffee, drinking, pizza, eating people. It's the capacity. So money, people, capacity, that's the same thing. And we talk about how we spend that. Pricing is interesting because we have way too much stuff to do. So the price of doing something is not the coffee and the pizza. It's what you couldn't get. It's the opportunity cost. Also, something which is interesting is that this challenge, portfolio challenge, is the same for all companies. So it's actually quite universal. You rarely see it like this, but it really is a matter of figuring out how do you balance your activities. It's also agnostic to how you do things. It doesn't really care about waterfall, agile, and all of that. The only question is, does it add up? Does it make sense what we are doing? And the most important message to take away is that there's a systemic nature of this area. So if there are things you need to do at the level of the portfolio that you don't do well, you can rarely compensate for that in other places. The best example is overload. So if there's too much stuff going on, it's very difficult from one party in that equation to fix it effectively. Of course, you can say no to things, but that just makes the other guys wait longer. So there are certain things that you need to deal with at the portfolio level. This is a drawing I made some years ago, and I still quite like it because this is the game that you play. So it's all the things, all your money, all your people, the roadmap. I don't think we talk enough about roadmaps. That's the centerpiece of the portfolio. When do you plan to do what? The delivery, the loop, looking for the weak signals, which is a new thing. So this is actually super, super important that you have the sensors for that. And of course, managing the risks, which is more of a classical thing. What do you think is the most important thing in portfolio management? What's the one tangible thing that you can probably always do better?
Decision.
It is a decision, but it's a very specific decision. Priority decision, yes, you are getting there. So this plays on options theory. So I agree, and it's more specific. So the decisions and priorities was answered. But it's actually about stopping things. It's about seeing that things are not working and being brave enough to walk away from it. Because that reduces your load and that creates space for something that could potentially bring value. So it's called also the sunk cost fallacy, is that you keep throwing good money after bad money, like my mom would say. That's the one thing that probably is the most important thing in this area. And it's on the list here below. So I just repeat it a bit. So we talk about portfolio agility. This is actually where the cohesion comes in. So you can only move if you're together. I mean, if we tried to take this room where everybody is sitting apart and said, please go one step to the left, everybody would be all over the place. But if we would be somehow lined up and said one step to the left, it would be like a beautiful shift of the whole group to the left. So portfolio agility means that you can shift effectively from one thing to the other, which is actually when you opt out of something, you can move on to something else. So always being aligned, being brave enough to walk away in time is the additions I make to this. So this is what I have the fun doing. You remember this picture with the clear whatever? So absolutely most of the portfolio management approaches you see today, they are on the right-hand side of this, deeply anchored, over-cluttered with unnecessary structure, way too many tools. So I was wondering a little bit, what happens if you go to the left side of this equation? How will it look like? What would it become? And luckily, there's a lot of advice. So if you look into some of the books, you will hear things like descale, don't scale, descale, decompose and recombine. That's the way you deal with complexity. If you build it big, it's just going to be blown apart when something changes. It also means that you need to be really listening for the things which are changing. So you talk about building a broad network of sensors, and your sensors are your people. So you probably want to involve a broader number of people, of course, relevant, but still broader. So you don't think of it as an isolated activity to figure out what does the money mean for the strategy. You actually want a broader set of people to be involved in that. Capturing the weak signals. There are some really great stories going on. There's this basketball game, some of you might have seen it, where there's a gorilla on the field and nobody sees the gorilla because they're looking for the ball. Similar exercises has been made with doctors' diagrams where they're looking for little detail, and like a big gorilla staring at it. Only 17%, according to this story, see them. So it is about seeing that gorilla in the odd context and actually daring to see it, because we also have a lot of psychological pressure in this area. If you see something that none of the other guys see, for example, if my zipper was open, right, nobody would say it. Actually, I don't have a zipper, but it could be open and nobody would say it. So this awkward thing is socially uncomfortable, and that's what we got to be better at. Then also, rather than making the bold strategic move, we talk about emergence. So we talk about more of this, less of that, shifting the directions, and a few other advices. And then there's a few don'ts, the temptations. So we talk about pseudo-certainty and calls to order. So typically, someone who sells you a tool would be a little bit on the pseudo-certain side of things. And it's not actually a bad thing because there's a room for it. It's just not doing all the things that you are promised. It becomes a little bit too certain. So pseudo-certainty is, for example, when you try to do better and more accurate planning. It doesn't work in the complex world. And then you have the calls to order. That's also when leaders wake up and say, this is a mess, we got to do something. You got to test it twice. You got to write better requirements. You try to make the call for order. And normally it works shortly, because anything you do to bring focus will work in a messy situation, but it normally doesn't last long. I know you all have examples of this, like better planning tools and better time registration, all of that. So don't do that, but try to look at this. So now we can start on the real presentation, which, and again, I think this is not, I mean, the elements of this is not new for you, but maybe it's a little bit new how it's put together. So this next picture I've had a lot of fun on. It's actually taken me several years to do it. I'm sure there's something missing, so happy to hear your feedback. But I try to say, if you take the portfolio conversation and you strip all the irrelevant things away, like value streams and budgeting and whatever, and really look at what's the portfolio conversation, I would say, at least for me at the moment, it's these 8 questions. So question number 1 is, do we know where we are going? Do we have the right objectives? Question number 2, which surprisingly few people remember to ask, is that, can the team actually do this? Do we have the muscle to carry this strategy? It's a very complex question. Do we put the money in the right places? I mean, do we have the right balance? Are these muscles doing the right things to deliver the strategy? When we look over time, do we see the right contributions? So it becomes this conversation, intent versus contribution, a bit of the dance. Then the sustainability question, load, spend, risk, all of that, is it balanced? And then the more dynamic questions where you're somehow looking for the weak signals. You're trying to see, do things add up? It's a reconciliation exercise. Does it fit with what we know? Or is it something we should change around? And then the ultimate question is, can you sleep at night? I know it's a bit banal, but actually it's pretty much like this. So you know it if you're running your team and something is not working. At least for me, it's nagging me. And I know I need to do something, and I procrastinate and all of that. So it eats my sleep, or at least it eats my good mood or something like this. So when you have done this well, the best sign is that you're at ease and you can enjoy your game or whatever else you're doing. And if your mind is not at ease, it's a good sign that you should explore it more, be confused about it. Does that make sense? Is there anyone who can see a question missing? I know that's a horrible question. What is number 9? I don't know. I haven't found the number 9. Of course,
Before the one, do we have the right objective? I think it's the purpose. Is the purpose of what you're trying to do well defined?
Yeah, that's right. So yes. So the purpose, so the mission, etc. And I fold all of that into the intent in that sense. So you're right. I agree. So this was a decomposition. How do you then recombine? And this is not logical. It's just something I found to work. So I actually found that it makes sense to look at these 3, I call them collaborations. So if you ask, where is the collaborative portfolio management coming from? It's these 3 collaborations. And it really means collaboration. So it means diverse groups of people, not everybody, but whoever is relevant at the time. And that's different for every organization. And I did it a bit more simple. So you can put up the questions for these. So the fitness for purpose is essentially, do we have the muscle to carry the strategy? The clarity of intent is that, do we know where we are heading? And remember, it's your strategy, so you can change it as much as you want. But if you change it all the time and nobody gets it, it's not really useful. So it's got to be sort of clear enough that people get it. And then there's the delivery alignment. That's the dance. How well do the intent meet the contribution? And delivery alignment might to some be an odd word. I like it. Somebody calls it QBR, somebody calls it portfolio alignment day, or program alignment day, or project day, or whatever. Anyway, it's the day where you meet and check that it all adds up. And then you can look at the work products. And this is actually interesting because this is almost like the language for this conversation, which takes part at 3 levels. So you have your vision strategy that becomes strategic objectives. I kind of like the way that the Scaled Agile framework does it. It talks about strategic themes, which is OKRs, objectives and key results, but you can do this a billion ways. So the way to do it is to get it expressed. And then you have like a time view on this, like a strategic roadmap. You want to get things done. So the things you want to get done is where the money and the objectives meet. I like to call those investment areas. I think that's a wonderful way of defining a job. Here's where we want to go. And remember, we is you, so you have been part of that conversation. Here's how much money we throw after it. Go have fun. It's delegated authority, so it's professional fun. So this is actually what creates the room for Agile. And then there is the conversation. What are we planning to do for the strategy? How does that look on a time view? And what does the work look like? Then the fitness for purpose, again, it's a bit of a side question, but it's like super important. Can your teams actually do what we want to do? So it's multi-level, multi-dimension question. Then in terms of what's being done, I also added this one for the ecosystem, because a lot of people forget the sins of the past. So I think at the end of what you want to do is define from where you are, what are the deficits from the past? Do you have a core banking system that needs replacement in the next 5 years? Then that's probably something you want to have on your strategic roadmap. Or are you free, evergreen, and you can spend all your money on the future stuff? Does that make sense? And that's actually it. So what I found is that you can have fun then to say, well, how does that fit what we are doing? So there's another famous concept in complexity called exaptation. That's the story of how the feathers warming the weird animals of the past became to wings that could fly. So it's like repurposing. A lot of people get scared when we start talking about this. They see more meetings coming, and boy, the only thing we have enough of in this organization is meetings. But actually, that's not the point. The point is that you move stuff from way too many meetings into a few meetings that actually make more sense. So one of the things I learned is that when you look at where do people talk about the portfolio, it's in a billion meetings in a billion places, and they're all guessing about what the other guys are talking about. So this defragmentation is something that you can even fix physically. You can pull topics out of agendas in little meetings and put them into this big meeting. And remember to cancel the other ones, right? It's not always nice. This also messes with the power structure. So you need powerful friends. So the activator sensor network, this is actually a little bit beginning the story of how to bring it to life. So this picture emerged, and I really like it because it shows this progressive way, like the cascading way, and then we turn this into a dance, so this actually becomes like in the middle. So if you take it one step further, it's almost like a line dance. We take all the contributions and line them up facing the strategy. Everything is there. Bring no surprises. All the talks we had beforehand. So this is not a discussion meeting. This is a reconciliation meeting. You don't want any surprises, but of course you find surprises. So people contributing are telling what are they contributing on, how does it add up with the strategy. One thing that's important is that you got to have what I call a useful collaborative structure. So I spoke with one CIO who went agile, and he had like 40 teams, and he had no idea. It was a man, so he had no idea what was going on. And that's not a useful collaborative structure. He was really flying blind, and there was way too many things going on. So something like this, if you have 40 teams uncoordinated, you probably want to take it down to like 5 to 7 areas, and that's where you would have this conversation. But you can do 40 if it makes sense. But I would say if you have 40 teams that can do things independently, then I would question, is that one portfolio, or could you even break it down and think of it as something different? And normally you can't, so you've got to aggregate it up a little bit. So then the delivery alignment itself, I suppose that some of you are familiar with the Scaled Agile Framework and the PI planning, this big room planning. Is there someone who hasn't heard about PI planning, big room planning? Only asking in the room. Remember weak signals, be brave, just let me know. Anyone who hasn't heard about Scaled Agile Framework, PI planning? Thank you, I appreciate it. So the idea of the Scaled Agile Framework is that you actually bring everybody together every 3 months, like 200 people, 12, 15 teams, and together they planned for the next period over 2 days. And the structure of that planning is so that you start by setting the context, you bring in some work items you have agreed at a higher level, and then the teams actually figure out what do we need to do and what do we need from the other teams. And they do 2 iterations of that over 2 days. And the whole thing ends with like a final plan presentation. And the one thing I always take away from that is that it rarely goes wrong. It can, but that's difficult because people always make sense. But what people always say who is present say, wow, this is the best overview we have ever had in this organization. I mean, I have never felt so good about any plan that is, well, not always, you also do a confidence vote and stuff like this, but that's basically the idea. So this event follows the same structure, except you don't do the planning, no surprises, so everybody comes well prepared. Start with a bit of business context, that's actually the strategy level. Then you have like the teams telling how are we contributing, objectives, roadmap, actual deliveries, risk, all of that. Maybe like a double Shark Tank time, like 15 minutes for each. If somebody has a question, you got to ask that question. That's the whole idea. I think we are still okay on time, right? Yes, good. I get nervous when you stand up. And then in the end, you have an open space like a bazaar. That means that everybody who participated stays back, and you can do things like demonstrations, little workshops. You can have the conversations you didn't have time to do. And then you meet in a month's time and do it all again. That's what this event is all about. When I worked in Nokia, we did this every month, 200 people. It was the feature platform organization, flying in from all over the world. And in the beginning, there was a lot of focus on the content. But actually, after some years, people started to plan around it. So it became like the center of the governance. They had their team meetings around it. Not everybody was present when everybody presented. You kind of knew when you had to be there, a bit like voting in the parliament. And it really formed the culture in the whole organization. People knew each other really well. If there was something to be discussed that wasn't urgent, you could deal with it there. If it was more urgent, you could deal with it in a different way. So this is also a huge culture building instrument. The only thing you cannot do is that you cannot do this on top of everything else. You've got to make it the one thing. So it looks a bit like this. And of course, this is a bit of the rosy picture. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to change the color. Someone told me that I'm totally inappropriate, so I need to fix that. But you say, when you start making things visible, very often you cancel things just by seeing them. I witnessed a CEO who canceled a double-digit load project. It was more than 10% of his whole capacity. Just when he got to know about it, he said, it was different days, so he said, "You're idiots. I mean, we are not doing this for that customer. I mean, how stupid can you be?" So bang, gone. So there's a lot of things that can be freed out simply by making them visible. It's almost like they vaporize, which is why I use the cloud. Then within 1 to 2 months, because this is really just about organizing a meeting. Of course, there's much more to it, but the tangible element is organizing a meeting where people come and tell about their work. So you can do that relatively quickly. I have done this many times. And then the pivotal moment is this thing when everybody gets this experience like, wow, this is pretty cool. I actually start to understand what the other guys are doing. And I always wondered, who can I ask this question? And now I can just ask, and everybody is here. And then you can take it from there. So it really sort of is a bomb under bad things in the organization. And if you are brave enough and use this idea to build the other things on, work on the fitness, work on the clarity, you can do miracles in something like 6 to 9 months in any organization of any size. But you cannot do this without sponsorship, and you cannot do this without good facilitation, because there are many turns you can take wrong. I actually almost talked about all of these, but in a sense it's a bit like renovating an old house. Lovely old house, but it's a little bit leaking and the pipes are blocked and all of that. So when you defragment this portfolio conversation, which is actually the physical thing, you pull it together in one cohesive conversation, and then you start to have that conversation inform the budget, inform the strategy, adjust the organization, adjust the plan, or the plan might adjust the strategy, etc. So it's a dynamic dance. Then that's how it starts to work. So wrapping up, Ilya Goldratt is one of my big heroes. He wrote about theory of constraints. There's a wonderful book called The Goal, which everybody needs to read, no matter what they are doing. It's like a novel of fiction. Well, if you work in something technical, at least. He has a concept called inherent simplicity. So he says that if you can find a few things to do really well, it will also allow you to do other things better. And what I claim is that no organization gets away from answering these questions. I mean, you've got to find those answers. And if you can answer them well, it will actually help you do other things better. So it's almost like the safest bet in the world. And interestingly, a lot of these questions are actually a bit confused, exposed to politics. Nobody really knows, not even who to ask. So, safe bet. But it's not a small change. And like I said, I have been fired more than one time because of this, because I'm simply working with the wrong people. So you've got to build the alliance. But this is no news to anyone. So the reason why chains fail is most often because lack of sponsorship. I mean, that's the number one overarching reason. And this is the same here. So you've got to build that sponsorship. You've got to work with a good facilitator. But actually, almost like any well-versed agile coach who has done more than team things can help you with this. It's not that complicated. It's tapping into complexity by making things simple and recombining. So it just requires the determination. And if you like more information, it's here. But I think I will leave it here. Thank you.